why don't we get started? Just quickly, the ground rules, we're going to try to get everybody done by 5. And we also want to keep the mics open and get some feedback. That said, we do want to take a little time to summarize some of our thoughts and propel things forward even more. So, Shannon?
So there are a couple of things that, I just have a couple of things I wanted to say. One of them is to reiterate the urging you to sign the declaration. It's at rightcaredeclaration.org, and signatures matter, and it can really start to get the ball rolling. And I urge you, if you can sign the declaration, to go home and ask 5 other people to sign it, or try to get 5 more people to sign it. And it will spark a conversation at the very minimum if you ask people to sign the declaration. The other thing is, I think that it's important for us all to realize that something that really was highlighted during the town hall, and in particular during the conversation between Rosemary and Dan, that the problem of overuse has to be seen really as a gate into the city of better health. And the problem of underuse is another gate into the same city. And that we have to understand and get the public starting to think about and talk about and understand the fact that the waste in the system is theft, as Don Berwick has said, that it is robbing our cities, our communities, and our country of other ways of improving health. And when we start to see that, I think we will start to see action. So those are really the only 2 things that I want to reiterate about this meeting.
Reshma.
Hi everyone, my name is Reshma Ramachandran. I'm a 4th-year medical student at Brown and also a public policy student at the Harvard Kennedy School. This year I'm serving as the Farm Free Chair for the American Medical Student Association. I'll just give you some background about what the Farm Free campaign is. So the Farm Free campaign actually began in 2002 due to a group of concerned medical students. Actually, Leanna was one of these few medical students that started the Farm Free campaign so long ago, and her legacy is definitely living on.
Long ago, long time ago.
She looks incredibly young. No, I'm just kidding. So the mission of the Farm Free campaign initially was to guide and train medical students to interact ethically with the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. And it also gave medical students an opportunity to take control of their medical education. There was a lot of concern from students that their education that they were receiving in the classroom and in the wards was being hijacked by the industry, was being too influenced by the medical device and pharmaceutical industry, and really not giving them the scientific basis for correct prescribing and the best care for patients. So it was an opportunity for students to really get engaged in that. And the campaign evolved over the years from giving workshops, from raising awareness, to actually creating a tool for change called the AMSA Farm Free Scorecard, which started in 2007. How many of you are aware of the US News and World Report rankings for universities? All of you. How many of you pay attention to them? Fair amount, okay. So the Farm Free Scorecard was modeled after that in order to look at medical schools and their conflict of interest policies. Basically the policies that govern the relationships between faculty and the institution and the pharmaceutical and medical device industry, and what sort of protections there were to ensure that the integrity of medical education and also clinical practice was protected. So the Farm Free Scorecard is great. You can go on amsascorecard.org and check it out. And it has a list of over 160 schools and actually grades them on a scale from A through F. So you can see what schools have an A and what schools have an F. And you can even check out your own institution. And so when I came into medical school in 2008, students at our school were really concerned because our score wasn't great. We had some negative publicity because of a psychiatry chair who was found to be ghostwriting and got a letter sent to him by Senator Grassley regarding this practice, and also because of my own uncomfortableness. So during my first year of medical school, I was going through outpatient clinics and had the opportunity to receive some clinical training, really shadowing a doctor and paying attention to what they were doing, going to interview patients, becoming comfortable with patients. And I noticed that almost every week there was a pharmaceutical rep who came in with free lunch. And it was great. I was a poor medical student. I didn't have a lot of money at the time due to loans, and I saw this farm rep, and they were very congenial. talking to you about, what your interests are, what your, where you're from. Same thing to my attending, knew all his kids, where his favorite vacation spot was, the whole gamut. And at the end of the visit, it always ended the same way, where the rep would give samples or coupons or some sort of advice about how to prescribe the samples that he was giving to the doctor, and kind of looking and giving him some sort of overview of what his prescription habits were. And later that day, when I was shadowing that doctor for the next 4 hours, I actually noticed that the doctor would see a patient and would oftentimes, regardless if the patient really asked for it or not, kind of bring up the idea of that, oh, we have samples that might be good for your condition, and it was a little uncomfortable at times. And I think I took comfort in the fact that my first year was pass-fail, and I decided to question the doctor and ask him, what was the justification for giving the sample that you just received from the farm rep? I understand that the patient came in with this condition, but you had me do a report about first-line and second-line medications, and this wasn't on that list. And what he told me was yeah. My attending was very nice, by the way. Very nice. But in response to that, he actually gave the same response we heard in the town hall. I have a lot of training, I have a lot of expertise in this field, I know what I'm doing, and I know how to discern what's industry influence and what's evidence-based influence, and I've looked at all the prescription information, and I know what the best decision to make is. And for me, as a medical student, I looked up to this attending, really, admired the way he interacted with patients, the way he prescribed and practiced, but I felt uncomfortable. And that uncomfortableness is what led me to look into the Farm Free campaign. And we actually had fourth-year medical students who were very active in the campaign in terms of making the scorecard available, collecting policies from different medical schools, and even standing up to hospital administrators and keeping our physicians accountable. In that same year, actually, a group of HMS students were actually featured in the New York Times, and I remember coming across that article and feeling kind of empowered. Some of you might have seen this article. It was a 2008 front page cover picture with 4 medical students standing in front of HMS talking about how they wanted to change their school's disclosure policy, actually make it mandatory that all lecturers before any medical school class would actually disclose their financial conflicts of interest or financial relationships with industry. And this was before kind of really unheard of, especially at an institution like Harvard, that just didn't happen. And at our institution, we didn't really have that as a mandated thing in place. And when I saw that, I thought, that would be so great. And so that's when I started getting involved in the Farm Free campaign and really joining a group of students that were organized to kind of empower themselves to take control of their education, but also at the heart of it, make sure that we were practicing the best medicine possible for our patients. And I think that's really what kind of drove me as a medical student to really become a part of a movement like the Farm Free campaign and the American Medical Student Association in general. Since then, the Farm Free campaign has really grown, and it's really due to the collaboration we've had with not just medical students and physicians, but with consumer groups. So right now, we're in a collaboration with Pew Charitable Trust, who helped us launch the first Farm Free scorecard, National Physicians Alliance, as well as Community Catalyst, a wonderful consumer advocacy group. And together, we really have been able to galvanize the scorecard as a tool for change at academic medical centers, but also bring awareness to a bunch of different groups that never before had heard of conflict of interest or had ever questioned their doctor's judgment in prescribing behavior. Right now, the scorecard is actually being expanded to 400 teaching hospitals, and we're really nervous about this. Because for the first time, patients will be able to look up their hospitals and see what letter grade that their hospital has for a conflict of interest policy. Just thinking about the implications of that is pretty big, And so Community Catalyst and MPA and Pew and us have really come together to try to think about this, but we really love your feedback in terms of how to navigate this field and really look at conflict of interest as not an issue about the hospital and its reputation and medical education, but really an issue about making sure we put patients first in terms of our prescribing behavior and making sure we give the best care possible. The other part of the Farm Free campaign that I also kind of wanted to highlight and also push some of the groups that are here to think about is this idea of access. So we work pretty heavily in the realm of access in 2 different ways. One, in terms of access to affordable medicine, so thinking about cost, but the other way is the access to the best meds possible. And actually, I'm a part of a group with the National Physicians Alliance, which is an FDA task force, where we as physicians and trainees are coming together to actually look at clinical trials and the FDA's approval processes to make sure that the medicines that are available out there are actually the best medicines. And in fact, some of the evidence we find out there is pretty appalling. We've seen medicines being approved when they have a 500% mortality rate. I'm not kidding about this. And we really need groups, not just these small little pockets, but an organized large group coming out of this conference to come together, patients and physicians hand in hand, to tell the FDA and to tell other regulatory bodies that when they make guideline decisions, when they make approval decisions, they need to keep patients in mind and make sure they're picking the best care possible. The other part I kind of want to, the other part I kind of want to challenge is the idea of patient and doctor groups coming together to look at legislation. So a couple of weeks ago, actually, AARP and Community Catalyst came together to write a letter to President Obama in regards to a specific provision that's in a free trade agreement. So such letters like that really have an important impact. And we actually saw a stalling of President Obama in terms of pushing some of these provisions that would hurt access to medicines. And we have different physician groups like Doctors Without Borders and AMSA working on this, but what we really want is a whole group of folks to really thinking about going beyond just even local advocacy, but thinking about national and international legislation work that they could do. So that's my, yeah.
I want to make sure we get time for everybody.
Yeah, sure. So as my last note, I just hope that we can all come together at the end of the day as patients, physicians, and trainees to work on some of these issues.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us even as we're approaching the end of our day. And I want to just say, first of all, what an honor and privilege it is and a humbling experience it is to be here with all of you, to hear all of your various perspectives. Thanks to Vikas and Shannon for putting together such a wonderful conference. So I've had the privilege of not only listening to the sessions, but also interviewing many of you in this room on your mentor stories. And I want to summarize 3 themes that I've heard from both the interviews and some of our sessions here. First, that stories are important. We know this, but every clinician I interviewed can point to one single incident when a mentor said something to them that changed the type of doctor they became. Now, that's really powerful, and I think that should say a lot to us as we go forward as patients and doctors about what we do to communicate that single story that could change someone's life. Second, there is so much fear in medicine. Patients are afraid. They're afraid for so many reasons. But you know what? Doctors are afraid too. Doctors are afraid of being sued. They're afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being uncertain. That mutual fear leads to distrust, to overtreatment, and as per Jerry Hoffman, it's Siamese twin, undertreatment, and a lot of blame. There's a third theme as well. A lot of people have said that it's the system that's at fault, that we can't blame doctors for practicing the way they do because they mean well, but they can't do much in a broken system. Well, I'm an optimist, and I've had the privilege of training with many great doctors who are social justice oriented, many of whom are in the room right now. So I'm going to say something that might anger a lot of people here. But I want to challenge this assumption that most doctors mean well. Doctors in this room might, but let's not be so optimistic to think that we represent the majority of doctors and the majority of patients here. Going back to the quote that Iona Heath said yesterday, systems enable, but people have to be ethical first. Are doctors ethical? Recently, I started a campaign called Who's My Doctor that Vikas mentioned earlier that calls for total transparency in medicine. This goes back to my AMSA farm-free roots. The idea is for doctors to voluntarily disclose on a public website information about their potential conflicts of interest, including drug company affiliations, revenue streams, salary streams, and also how their salary is determined. It's an attempt to break the cycle of fear by telling our patients, I am here to serve you. So you have a right to know who I am and what conflicts I have that may affect you. It also allows us to start a conversation about potential overtreatment and harm. Well, some doctors in this room have signed on as early adopters. I never thought, though, that it would be so controversial. I thought that some doctors might not like this idea. But after I wrote Who's My Doctor, I got all kinds of comments from practicing doctors in their own name on public websites. I'm going to read some of them verbatim. I don't have money or time to buy my lunch. When I became a doctor, I don't recall taking an oath of poverty. I devoted 12 years of my life to being a slave to society. I depend on income from drug companies to serve my patients. Even if I speak for them, I internally roll my eyes at their sales spiel. I find it an invasion of my privacy to disclose where my income comes from. My patients don't disclose their incomes to me. Maybe the fascist Dr. Wen needs to move back to China. So when I was a medical student, I attended an AMA conference, and I recall this discussion in the House of Delegates about universal health care. This one physician stood up and said, in opposition, "We are the American Medical Association. We are not the American Patient Association." This was in 2003, and he received a standing ovation. So we're here to talk about humane end-of-life care. We heard a lot of great stories about that, right? Well, I wish that I had Diane Meyer and Rabbi Adras to help my mother when she was at the end of her life. My mother had metastatic breast cancer, and she fought it for 8 years. She was very brave, and she knew exactly how she wanted to die. Not only did she sign advance directives, but she signed a 12-page document that she insisted to be part of her medical chart about how she wanted to die at home. She enrolled in hospice. She talked to all of her doctors, all of her family in China and in the US about this. Well, one day when I was a resident, I got a call to say that she was in the ICU, and I flew back. And when I arrived, the doctors were about to intubate her. But she signed documents. I'm her healthcare proxy, I said. Well, what is this about? The ICU doctor looked me in the eye, pointed at my then 16-year-old sister standing next to me, and said, "Remember when you were that age? How would you have liked to grow up without your mother?" Her long-term oncologist was there too and said, "This is your mother. Can you face yourself for the rest of your life if you don't do everything for her?" I knew my mother so well, and I was an emergency physician. And yet, that was the single hardest decision I ever made to end her life. And I carried those words with me every day. All right, so we have an imperfect system. But if this system gets fixed, are these doctors going to get better? I'm not saying that all doctors are bad. And let's be honest, though, not all doctors are good. We blame insurance companies for greed. We blame corporations for all this capitalism. But let's not forget that we all, as doctors, are part of this as well. So I want to give you 3 suggestions for what to do. First, we've talked a lot about teaching medical students, and we say that it's about medical schools, but I don't think so. I think it's also about recruiting the right people to enter medicine who really are committed to a life of service. If you're not committed to service, go to another career. There are plenty of other careers out there. And we have to foster that idealism in medical school and throughout residency. And all of you here who are committed teachers who have that social justice as your core, you have to teach your medical students and residents, because it's only with you as the role models that we're going to make a difference. Second, fight fear with transparency. One way is through telling your stories of personal harm, of overuse. For those of you interested in joining Who's My Doctor, please email me. My email is my last name dot first name, wen.lena@gmail.com. This is my attempt to peel back the shroud of medicine, the shroud of secrecy surrounding medicine, because I want to look every patient in the eye and say, don't be scared of me. I don't take any money from drug companies or device companies. I don't have any interest that may adversely affect you. I don't make more from ordering tests. I don't make less from ordering tests. You can trust me. I'll be vulnerable here with you. Now, third, and this might be even most controversial, we talk all the time about not offending people. Let's get this movement, let's get people on board. Well, it's not going to work. It's not going to help to be gentle and sensitive anymore. I think we need to jump straight into the fire and express the outrage that so many of us feel. Seth Godin writes about how the failure of marketing, of marketers, is to target the middle and to say, let's get the people in the town hall who are the 2 to 8. Forget the 0, forget the 9s and 10s, right? Let's target the middle. But actually, he says, let's target those who have a neglected worldview. Let's target the outrage to these people. Just like you can't convince me to join the Tea Party, that's just not going to happen. You also can't convince all those doctors I mentioned earlier to come and join us, so forget about it. But instead, let's focus our energy to have the conviction, the courage of our conviction, as Diane Meyer said earlier. Let's speak truth to power, as Pat Lee reminded us earlier. And finally, I end with the words of Dr. Lown, that change for the better is not inevitable, but it is possible. We can, if only we will it. Thank you.
I'm David Newman. I'm from New York. I identify as an obsessive health evidence person. I suppose I'm also somebody who works at Mount Sinai and all of those other things, but mostly I'm obsessive about health evidence, and so I'm going to talk about that for a second, because clearly what you're hearing in the room now is movements. You're hearing about movements and the attempt to move people into groups. Karl Popper, I want to mention Karl Popper last night at dinner, and it resonated for me because Karl Popper's, I'm sure you all know, sort of the father of scientific thinking in the 20th century, and he sort of shaped the way we think about science and evidence and data. And data is, whether we like it or not, evidence, science, it's the godhead of this subculture. We are all agents of science, either directly or indirectly, and so when we try and capture power, when we try and capture people, when we try and move people in this subculture, this health evidence and this health science subculture needs to see that you respect their godhead and that you know their godhead as well as they do. So I have always sort of obsessed about healthcare evidence, and the Karl Popper stuff, Karl Popper was the guy who said, there's inductive and there's deductive reasoning, right? Inductive is I see a goose, the goose is white, all geese are white. And that's not really, that's not sort of what we think of as scientific thinking. We think of deductive reasoning as scientific thinking. And the problem is when we do a randomized trial, let's say on statins, and we look at, a whole bunch of statins and patients who are taking statins, and we randomize to a placebo or statins, and then we try and make a decision from that data, we've taken the sort of scientific road with that data as best we can, but then really what we're trying to do is make an inference. We are trying to make inferences about populations. That's what research is. Research isn't about the people who are in the study. It's about everybody else. We're making an inference about the rest of the population from a sample, and that's really inductive at its core. So Karl Popper said, it's inductive, so how are we going to sort of get rid of that problem? How are we going to get around that and be scientific? Well, the way we get around that is instead of saying, I see a goose, the goose is white, all geese are white, we're going to say, I see a goose, the goose is black, all geese can't be white. That's a true statement. And you can get to a true statement by falsification, by proving something false, by proving something not to be true. You mentioned skepticism. This is the natural position of the scientist, is the skepticism. And the reason is because we can only make true statements by falsifying things, by proving things to be false. That is how you get to a true statement. There's no such thing as affirmation as a truth statement. That's why there's like a, cell theory of life. We're pretty sure that cells are the building block of life. Pretty sure. But we still call it a theory. The theory of evolution. We're pretty sure about evolution. But we still call it a theory, and the reason is because you can't affirm to a truth statement. You can keep affirming, but the instant you find something that proves you wrong, your true statement is gone and you start over again. So our biggest problem is when we look at science and we're trying to be scientists, we wear that white coat. And you know why we wear the white coat, right? At the turn of the 19th century, we were in sort of trouble. We were bloodletting a lot. We were bleeding people. And we sort of got this reputation as bleeders. And even after, decades after bloodletting had been proven to be harmful rather than helpful, we were still bloodletting. And then sort of, Leuwenhoven came along and Pasteur came along, and there were all these advances in the biological sciences at the bench research level. So doctors said, we are looking like charlatans and quacks and snake oil salesmen, so let's just wear something that makes us look like the bench researchers, because they've been getting it right. So we took the white coat. When we wear the white coat, and when somebody walks into the office and sees the white coat, they're thinking of science. They're thinking of Karl Popper. They're thinking of randomized trials. They're thinking of falsification. They're presuming that we have proven things to be true from the standpoint of skepticism. They're assuming that we have proven everything we recommend. When a patient walks into the office, the exam room, they think that if you say, looks like PSA would be right for you, that's proven to be true. And we spent 25 years using PSA and not having proven it to be true. In fact, When we finally got the data on PSA, it turned out we were totally wrong. PSA doesn't save lives, and in fact, it increases impotence and surgical complications without saving lives. So we had put the cart before the horse. We actually started using something before we had proven it to be useful and helpful. That's not a skeptical standpoint. That's not skepticism. And when we see statins and randomized trials for statins, and the AHA says, oh, if it's a 7.5% risk over the next 10 years, then everybody ought to be on a statin. Well, what randomized trial ever said that? Right? So again, they're asking us to do something that's against our nature. We wear the white coat. We call ourselves skeptics. We have a godhead in our subculture. We believe in Karl Popper. We give lip service to the idea of science, and then we violate ourselves. And this is a game I call naming the shadow. We are angry at ourselves. We don't like it, and y'all in this room have recognized it. You see it, and that's why you're here. You're disaffected and angry and upset with the way medicine has gone. You feel that we have not been true to our science and our philosophy. You see that patients are unhappy and hurt at the end of their visit instead of happy and helped. And you're in this room because you get that. Most other people don't, including doctors who are, they have their nose to the grindstone. They are working really, really hard. All the doctors I know are working very hard. And they are looking at the trees and not seeing the forest. But inside, they feel it. They are disaffected. They are discontent. They are unhappy with their life and their career and the path that they've taken because they don't get it. They don't know why. You're in this room because you know why. So I would like for you to think about going back to where you came from and thinking about that. Being a person who is a source of knowledge and a source of scientific thinking and a source of happiness where you are. As a source of happiness, people will see you and they will say, what's wrong with her? What's wrong with him? And then they'll hear you speak and they'll understand that you get it. They'll understand that you actually know what's going on, even if you can't get into a fight every day with everybody you talk to or with the system, and don't get fired over this. But if you understand why you're disaffected and you can start to make that seep through the ranks all around you, if you can just know that, we have this thing that's happening right now, which is we're at a moment in history. We're at a moment for the first time in American history in the last 40 or 50 years where healthcare reform seems to be coming. It seems to be coming. It's a slow path and it's ugly, but it seems to be coming. And as long as you know what you know, and as long as you can start to make that seep out to the people around you and they can feel you and understand you, then we have a grassroots movement. You're the grassroots movement. We are the grassroots movement. And if we can be the grassroots movement, and at the same time there's this top-down change that starts to happen, where there's a little bit of help from the top, the legislative side, the policy side, then a top-down movement starts to meet the grassroots movement, and in the middle, that's revolution. So I would encourage you all to carry this revolution to where you came from and think about it every day. Be that person that you want to be. Show everybody around you what they can be. And I think we'll probably get there. And I appreciate that we have a chance to do this.
I'm Betsy Gilbertson. I work for the Unite Here Health, which is a union healthcare trust fund. I'm the daughter of a physician. I trained as a nurse. I was a patient advocate before I became a nurse, while I was a nurse, and now, for the last 20 years, I've been an insurer. And I became an insurer because I believed from my earlier travels along the way that the way healthcare gets paid for it impacts how it is actually delivered. And perhaps impact is too weak a word, shapes the way it gets delivered. So I decided it would be interesting to try to represent a group of people who were, how to put it, unions are the only perfectly incented group that I know in this panoply that we have in front of us, who are incented to advocate for the interests of their members, and thus whose healthcare trust funds ought to advocate for their collective interests in the area of healthcare. So that's what I try to do every day, and that's how I got here. And what I've observed from my wanderings around the healthcare world for the last very long time is that we have a health services enterprise that's dominated by unfettered capitalism and entrenched institutional interest. And I believe it profoundly threatens the soul of medicine. At this conference, many of us have talked about the things that we're doing to try in our own corners of the world to do what we can to fight the good fight and to advocate for the interests of patients in the best ways that our situation makes possible for us. So we've heard from many of you, and it's been wonderful, about the various things that you do and hope to do. And we've also heard a lot of really interesting ideas about what a better future could look like. So I've come away from listening to all that, trying to think about what this conference might do to help move us along the way. And I've had 3 thoughts that I'd just like to share with you. One is that overuse and avoidable care have been a recurrent theme in this conference. But I think it's very important that it be a theme and not the theme. And the reason I say that is that I think the right theme is right care, because I think it's a really deep commitment to patients that has gotten us collectively here. And so I think that's what our most powerful source of motivation is. And thus, that's the way we ought to frame what it is we're trying to do. The second is that I hope that this conference can catalyze relationships among us and help us develop new relationships that we didn't have before we came. Swimming upstream against mainstream culture is a very difficult activity. And among other things, it is really lonely, often. So I think we need each other. And I hope that this conference can help us create a vehicle where we have each other in ways that we didn't before we came here. The third is that I just wanted to comment on the combination of health professionals and patient/consumer advocates in the room. I've never been in a group that was as mixed in that way. And I think it's really wonderful. And I think it's a very important element of a core element of what we need in the future. And I say that because our professions, whatever stripe of health professional we are, we try and work in those circles, and the consumer advocates, the advocates for better care, try to work in their circles. But they very rarely do this. And in fact, I think that the combination is potentially much more powerful than our individual or, individual interest group activities separately. I have a little experience from an earlier stage in my work life where I was part of a group of women advocating for choices in childbirth and for nurse midwifery care, and who were working with a group of nurse midwives to actually try and promote the best possible approach to the process of care that would make it possible for all of us to be able to deliver our babies with midwives if we chose. And that collaboration was the single most powerful engine, even though it was tiny, was in one place, was a very powerful engine. So I think that we have, in this collaboration between patients, advocates, and physicians, I think we have the potential to unleash a new and very powerful force. And I hope we can take that away as we leave.
Thank you. I haven't prepared any remarks, and so watch out. Somebody shut me up if I go too long. As one of the organizers of this event, obviously I'm delighted with how it's gone and the mix of people, the richness of the conversation. So I think it's been spectacular. I had no idea how this mock town hall thing would go. I thought, gee, that kind of sounds interesting. Let's try it. So Bill, thank you. And where is March? And March. And I could say that about every panelist and everybody who offered comments, but I'm going to stop because I'm actually kind of bothered right now. And what I'm bothered by is yes, this was a revival meeting. It was great. It felt good. Now we got to do stuff. And I'm a little bothered that we need to get concrete fast, and we don't have enough time today to do that. We have some time tomorrow to do that. Yes, we're going to have a conference. We'll tell you exactly when. It may be exactly a year from now or a few months beyond, and hopefully we'll see you all there. And we'll structure it so that we can expand and dive deeper and have more people. But really, between now and then, there's a lot of work to do. We all have our own organizational affiliations and our own projects. We're all very busy. So it's not going to be easy, but I do think, putting my institutional hat on, I think, I want to commit the Lown Institute to working with each and every one of you in whatever way we can to keep these individual streams moving in the same direction, enlarging it and growing it. And, I would be happy to get really specific, but I don't want to take too much more time right now to do that. The one thing I do want to say, I want to criticize my own criticism. I'm trying to learn from Dr. Lown. And that is that building awareness is not nothing. And that having the goal of simply having more people in the room next time is not nothing. And that's because at the end of the day, what it's about is creating a large enough community that there is power, real power for change. However you want to construct the path, whatever you see as the targets, that's really what it's about. It's about power and it's about love and figuring out how to get there. And I think that's all I want to say. So let's open it up because we have time, and I'd love to hear people's reactions and thoughts about what we do next.
Yes.
Right. I'm Phil Caper. I just wanted to point out that overutilization is a cause of the cost explosion we're seeing. But the uncontrolled increase in prices is probably almost as important, if not more important. This is what happens when you create a system which has no natural boundaries, no natural restraints, and you populate it with literally, and there's money flowing into it from thousands of channels, and you populate it with entities that are trying to maximize their own sales and profits. And this is absolutely predictable when you have that, and particularly when there's a huge asymmetry of information between the sellers and the buyers. The sellers have all the information, as Stephen Brill pointed out in his Time magazine article last spring. And I don't think this is a failure of these organizations, these corporations. They're simply doing what they're built to do, and they're doing a very good job of it. It's a failure and a massive failure, in my view, of public policy. We let them do it. It's a problem of public education. And I just wanted to put that on the table as another set of considerations.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I would add to that, it's really a problem of democracy in some important ways.
Can I just say something?
Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Wilkes. I haven't spoken.
Aaron, 1 sec.
Yep.
Can we hold you up 1 second?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to highlight something that actually remarkable that happened where physicians actually championed in terms of cost. 100 oncologists signed on to a public letter in Blood Journal in February of this year, calling the prices of cancer drugs exorbitant, immoral, that they should not be that high at all, and in fact also published an editorial in the New York Times. Shortly afterwards, they actually stated in that editorial that they would not include those drugs in their formulary anymore because they couldn't charge $100,000 per patient for that drug per year. After that, the drug companies actually dropped the price down, showing how kind of random and arbitrary the drug pricing system is in the United States, and how the power of physicians coming together to say something about that really championed change in that realm.
Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Wilkes. I haven't spoken yet at the mic, but I currently serve as the Director for Emergency Medicine Quality and Innovation for Los Angeles County Department of Health Services, which is the group that runs our public safety net in LA. And I come, as an ER physician, as a health services researcher, and as somebody who's trying to actively change the way that we deal with overuse, especially in the ERs, but also in our whole hospital system. And I wanted to share a couple of suggestions about what I think we could do for next year. I think this conference is particularly unique in the sense that not only do we have a full range of the physician staff amongst different specialties, but we have nursing, we have journalists, we have insurers, we have all kinds of people here that you don't get in most conferences that you attend, especially as a physician. And while it's been said at the conference sometimes that anecdotes are not necessarily helpful always, one of the things that I think is weakest about people like ourselves in terms of communicating with the public is that the other side is very good with their anecdotes. And we're not, especially the physicians. And I think we have a unique opportunity here to take advantage of our media, attendees, and combine with our physicians and nurses to start building the skill set for everybody to be sharing their stories in a way that's really effective. On top of that, while me being a data person at heart, I am not the greatest at all my storytelling, but it's really important that the storytelling be backed up with data. And what I'd like to see, next year is potentially some more constructive, smaller groups where, one, you can start to build your skills as a storyteller. Two, you can really start to share concrete ideas about how to disseminate the data well in ways that will help combat both overuse and underuse of services in healthcare. And I think this group in particular is really one of the only groups where we can generate that kind of a discussion in a way that we can reach healthcare as a whole. And I think we are uniquely positioned to do that based on all the different types of people that we have here today and moving forward.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you so much.
Gosh, can I share? I learned a phrase yesterday that I hadn't heard before. You've heard the plural of anecdote is not data. You've heard that, right? The plural of anecdote is not data. And I've heard that, and I've said it for years, but yesterday I heard a new one, which was, it's corollary. The plural of anecdote is policy. So, right, as crazy and awful and backwards as that is, probably worth keeping in mind.
Yeah. John Nance of Orca Institute. First of all, we've been telling each other stories very effectively since we were in caves, and it is the most effective means of human communication of complex ideas, no question about it. And my friend here had, first time I've heard anybody say this, and I thought it was very brilliant, because you're right, I'm a lawyer also, and don't hit me, I've never handled a malpractice case. But I can tell you that this is one of the conundrums in American life, is that we permit corporations to form, they do it in our name in each state, and they do exactly what they say they're going to do. And if you look at the incorporation documents, and I've incorporated a bunch of them over the years, they always say to make money by any legal means. So it is not the corporation, it's us. And to that I want to speak really quickly. We've done a wonderful job, and by the way, thank you, because thank you everybody for this conference, and Shannon, thank you for having me here. Very enlightening, and a beautiful progression of bringing us down to the grassroots, which is where this has to start. We can't look to Congress. Congress can't get out of its own way. That is an American tragedy, which is going to kill us as a nation if we don't figure it out eventually. But we've got a lot of folks out there in our body politic who are absolutely positively devoid of even the most rudimentary knowledge of what's going on, and we've got to inform them. And I thought the town hall was a brilliant suggestion and a brilliant idea, and I know there are other ways to do it, but that's very good. Do you remember, most of you did see this, it was one of the town halls a few years ago, a woman at the end of it gets up, angry as heck, obviously in the Medicare years, points her finger at the presidential candidates on the stage and says, "You keep your grubby government hands off my Medicare." A hush fell over the crowd. But this is the type of nonsense that we have. A recent survey, CNBC went out, and not the best of maybe surveys, but it was still, I think, something that was validated. They asked the same group of people, what do you think about Obamacare? 43% said it's the most terrible thing to ever come along. It's socialism, it's communism, it's fascism. Try to get those all on the same page. And they asked the same people, what do you think of the Affordable Care Act? 63% said it's great. Our body politic does not know what's going on, and I agree. This is up to us to help them with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna take, there's a lot of people. I want you all to speak, and therefore we are gonna go over 5, but those of you who need to leave, please do so quietly. But I'm gonna pause because I want Poor Egg, Joe Colucci,
Yes.
Claudia Kenny, Rebecca Rockwood. They're like, uh-oh, what? I want you all to come down. Come down.
And Jessica's not here. Jessica's not here. Somebody likened a conference to a duck, which is on the top, the duck's very calm, and underneath, the duck's doing this. These are the duck's feet. Thank you for keeping us afloat. Thank you, Cora.
And those of you who were here last time would know another one was Jessica Gottseg, and she's actually been very active at this conference as well. She's working part-time for us. She's getting an MPA. She's acing her courses, and she's not here probably because she has an exam. Last time I got to embarrass her in front of her father who was here, but I can't do it now. So let's move on.
Hi, I'm Kendra Lawrence. I'm a student from Vancouver, BC, and I'm working with the Therapeutics Initiative and the Cochrane collaboration. And I just wanted to commend the young women on the panel. I was really impressed by how much outside the box you think, and you're actually acting on it, and I just think that's so brave. And as a student, I was trying to do things differently, and I ran up against some obstacles, and the good people I work with at the Therapeutics Initiative, they really encouraged me to keep going, and I just wanted to read you what they sent me. It's called A Note to My Younger Colleagues, Be Brave by Harlan Krumholtz. It's just the last paragraph. And he writes, if you take the path toward clarity, I guarantee that you will occasionally find people who will disparage you. They may seek to undermine you, find ways to marginalize you, and try to incriminate you. They may come from directions that surprise you. Powerful ideas often attract attacks that focus more on individuals than ideas. If you raise inconvenient truths or voice uncomfortable opinions, particularly if they threaten someone's comfortable status quo, then you will discover much about the characters of those with whom you disagree. But always take the high road, engage in dialogue about ideas and evidence, and be motivated by the opportunity to best serve patients and the public. You will not regret it. And I have 2 pragmatic suggestions for how we can actually take action and work towards some improvements. The first is, for those who are established in the room, make sure that you support your students who want to think critically and do things that are differently, because it is frightening. And the second thing is to be farm-free, to move towards that, we need to support those initiatives. So support independent research. That's a great pragmatic way to start. The Therapeutics Initiative is the only group in Canada, and it's unique in the world. And David sings their praises, but you know, we are struggling. So find out more about us, and you're always welcome to come visit us in Vancouver. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Bart Windrum. I'm a layperson. I thank you so much to the Institute for making it possible for me to attend. I became an end-of-life reform advocate after experiencing the very troubled, that's an understatement, pair of 3-week terminal hospitalizations of each of my parents, only 15 months apart, in 2004 and 2005. That caused me to do a lot of thinking. I authored and published a book. More recently, I authored a linguistic thanatological work, and I presented a TEDx talk. And to learn about my work, you can either find me and grab a sheet that I have, or simply Google Windrum TEDx, and you'll get it. It's a 20-minute talk. If you can't handle the performance in the middle of Windrum's Never Say Die rap, then skip over it, because I explain the Matrix after the rap. My internal gyroscope has changed in the last several days. I did not know that a radical medical cohort existed. I have always been skeptical, but I have tended towards the cynical, and thanks to Iona for helping me adjust my self-assessment. It will help me approach my audience, which is my fellow citizens. But I do have some words for doctors, and I come, of course, from outside medicine. The way I see it, the two basic prongs for end of life today, one is medicine saying, fill out the advance directives and bring them into us, and we'll all cross our fingers. The trouble is they don't come with a warning label, and you folks much know, I think, what that warning label should say. The second is to engage in spiritual work. But the trouble I see is this great middle ground that I have addressed since my parents' deaths and my experience of shock and harm during them. And that is the range of practical impediments to dying in peace. They'll trip us up in a moment, and you know that. I see a couple of things. I'm troubled that medicine doesn't push back at us a little bit. I see a medical world that is too willing to accept all of we citizens who show up clueless, in denial, having done no work. And it pains me, actually, because I feel you're taking too much on. I suspect you have plenty, enough on your plates, without trying to solve all our problems for us. I would like to see a little gentle pushback. I don't know the languaging for it. I say study up and make some sense of 21st century impediments. That's a line from the rap, right? I see something else also, if I can remember it. Yeah, transparency. Boy, Leanna and I had an amazing connection. I just came to this after developing the Matrix, which has 16 new terms for dying instead of this amorphous word dying. And it is this. I express it as an opaque dying marketplace. Advanced directives is me telling medicine where I'm at. It's showing you mine. But as a patient, I need to see yours. And by that I mean I would like declarations. I would like a shingle hung out. What range of dying services does any provider, doctor, nurse, department, hospital offer the public if dying becomes on the table? And I see a continuum, a 5-stage continuum, from never say die, mainstream management, conservative palliation, aggressive palliation, and aid in dying where legal. And I think that the only moral and ethical thing to do is declare that in advance so that like can seek like. Those who do not want to die can find providers who agree with that and provide that service. And another piece is, do you refer to other providers that provide the other range of services even if you don't agree with them? Okay? I haven't heard anybody say this stuff because everybody's just fixated on ADs and contemplation. So that's briefly where I'm at, where I've come to. Yes, it is an extremely lonely road, and that's sort of what's depicted by Regina Holiday on the back of my walking gallery jacket. And I just want to leave you with that, and thank you all very much.
Thank you.
So it's now 5 o'clock for those who need to leave. We wish you well. We thank you for being here. And if you want to stay, I think if we can...
We'll stay till they kick us out.
Yeah, and if you can sort of
yeah, let's try to
keep it compressed.
Keep it compressed.
Martin Levine, I spoke earlier. I would suggest maybe inviting, I realize VA is represented to some degree here, but maybe more people from the Department of Defense. They participate in the National Quality Forum quite a bit, and obviously they're spending half the amount of money that is being spent on healthcare. I also want to point out that there's $33.9 billion a year spent on through complementary and alternative medicine. NICAM kind of came up with that number recently, and it is not to be sneezed at, both for why it's been spent and where they're getting the money to spend that. And then the other piece that I want to suggest is insurance companies under the PPACA have to now spend 80 cents on the dollar by law on health care. Of course, their first question was, what do you mean by health care? But that's beside the point. Question is, what are they doing with that margin that could be as low as 12 cents on the dollar and probably higher, probably around 15 to 16 cents on the dollar? Where are they spending that, and why are we letting them get away with that as a society? And when we look at the insurers, one of the things that I think is important, you know, we saw the statistics for China going up 27% in 1 year in their premium. Well, the state of Maine does not have the wherewithal to be able to manage that insurer in that state to be able to say, you really don't need that 27%, that's full of it, we want to see your numbers. There's no transparency there. We need that transparency, and we should advocate for that. But one of the things that we did was we looked at residency programs and their patient outcomes in diabetes, and what we found is that patients with Medicare actually had better outcomes than the patients with commercial insurance. And that was across the board. That was whether they had Blues, whether they had Aetna, whether they had Humana, United Healthcare. And when we told the entities that were buying that care, the employers, they got enraged. And they said, what do you mean? We're spending this much money, 23% increase last year, 15% the year before. We're not getting what we should be getting out of this. And they went after them. And basically went after the insurance companies. I would think that potentially getting some of those employers on board as well would be a good thing for next year. Thank you.
We intend to do that. I think that's a good idea. I'm abusing my privilege, but I'm from Canada. Single payer works. Single payer could work here. I also think it doesn't have to be single payer. All right. But let me just say, if it's not single payer, then it really needs to be regulated like a utility, which is kind of what I heard you say. Go.
My name's Jonas Green. I'm an internist, administrator, and recovering health services researcher at Cedars-Sinai. I had a couple of thoughts, but the one that I really wanted to express pertains to some of the pathology behind the symptoms that we've been discussing here. And in essence, the one piece that I wanted to add to the conversation that I felt hasn't been fully addressed is one of thresholds. That one of the most vexing challenges in our healthcare system for individual physicians making decisions is recognizing where their thresholds are and making decisions that are based on as much evidence as possible, as addressed by David, but recognizing also what the potential influences are and having tools at their wherewithal to mitigate some of those. So as examples, in defensive medicine, knowing what they can actually do to mitigate the concerns associated with that, and how to measure their own degree of uncertainty, respond to that uncertainty, how we as a collective can address the issue of profit. And I think most of the physicians here in the room, perhaps, and most of the other actually folks in the room, perhaps unlike myself, are well practiced in addressing their anxiety and knowing, for example, when they come up to a microphone, how to reduce that anxiety. But I don't think so many of us who practice are so good at actually addressing reducing our level of concern and uncertainty, and addressing all the factors that sort of accompany one into the room when making a clinical decision. So I'd like to have the sort of thresholds piece and self-recognition of thresholds become part of the conversation to a greater extent than it already is.
So we have to let the people at the back go home. They're hitting the end of their day. But 30 seconds. If you can do it in 30 seconds, we got 2 minutes here. So 30 seconds starting now for each of you.
This is Kathy Day again. And quickly, I want to compare being a seamstress with being a physician or other kind of caregiver. You need the skills, the tools, the knowledge, the ability to make a right cut, make a right fit. And oftentimes there are straight seams that you can just routinely, you can just zip those seams through really quickly. This is a blog I'm writing, so it's kind of half-baked in my brain. But it kind of fits medicine when you think about it, in that if you're fitting a sleeve, there's a time that you have to slow down. Anybody can make a jacket. Any old bag can make a jacket. But to be a caregiver, you have to have a heart, and you have to have ethics, and you have to care about your fellow human beings, and you have to love them.
Great, perfect, thank you. Next.
I just wanted to bring you a cool breeze from the Great White North. We don't call it socialized medicine, by the way. We call it public health insurance. We're always puzzled by that term. It's easy. We pay federal income tax. The federal government transfers to the provinces who run the health insurance. To qualify for health insurance, I have to have lived in BC for 6 months. My husband and I pay $126 a month for the two of us. And we're not at the low end of the income scale. It's by income. It can be done. It breaks my heart to see you destroying your roads and schools and towns.
Thank you.
So I hope you can change it.
We foolish people to the south. Thank you. Randy, 30 seconds.
Randy Oster. We learned how in Brazil they changed their system for C-sections. He outlined a 3-step plan. Right now we feel a little overwhelmed, but that same plan we can use. Awareness, system redesign, relook at payments. My message is we talk a lot about the patients and creating awareness with the patients. I want us also to focus on the doctors, and as we go through this process, understand what they have to feel and help them understand that the change will also it won't benefit them in a negative way by only reducing their income. And when we do that together, we as a team in 10 years, Shannon, we will get there.
That's a great message. Thank you, Randy. And Aaron, you get the last word.
This is
in 30 seconds.
All right, in 30 seconds. My name is Aaron Stupple. I'm a resident at Beth Israel Deaconess, and I think a project going forward could be med students that are left. You raise your hand. Look at them all, and half of them left already. And I wanted to acknowledge them and thank them for coming. And I think a major part of the future is medical students. I think we could work with the National Physicians Alliance, AMSA, and others to make an online white coat to ensure professional and longitudinal professional commitment to these moral obligations that we all have. And I think the only way of changing the structures that these big cranes are building is to have the people coming in decide to use them in better ways. So thanks so much.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see those of you who are joining us for working groups tomorrow in the morning. We'll see the rest of you next year.
And as the Russians do,